I suppose it can really be that tough. So yeah, guys, maybe today's message then is for you. I think if your responses in the chats are anything to go by about how the week has gone so far. So I'm just going to go straight into sharing my screen, because most of what I'm sharing today is going to be from a presentation. So if you guys can someone can just confirm that my screen is visible to you guys. Can you guys see?
All good, all good.
Okay, 100%. So yeah, just as an introduction, I think to get into the talk of today, and perhaps let me minimize the faces here. So yeah, just as an introduction, those of you who know me will know that music is very special and very close to my heart, and I've been privileged as well, I think, to be honored by a lot of my friends who are musicians who have dialed into the call, friends that I look up to as musicians, but friends that I also exchange a lot of ideas and thoughts, and we totally geek out around our musical passions and basically everything that we enjoy about music. And I have a particular penchant for jazz music, which has been which I've had for several years now. And I think I really enjoy jazz music because of how versatile it is, and how beautifully it's able to be fused with various genres, and like what gospel, whatever, house, whatever it is that the kind of music you make, it's once you bring in jazz is able to bring in a very sweet flavor. And this goes from, I think you can trace back the history of jazz from the 50s, post-bop era, coming all the way to today, where you have very interesting interpretations of jazz music from artists like Jacob Collier, Robert Glasper, Snarky Puppy. These are artists that some of us may know, who are innovating in the space of that music. So that's the background, I think, which I thought was very important, so that you understand where I'm coming from. And you have guys, Sbonga's not on the call, but if there are any other Marvel nerds or geeks on the call, you'll find that Marvel or Star Wars geeks will collect the comic books, or they'll collect artifacts and souvenirs that reflect their passion for this movement, because it's like a community that you belong to. So for me, the way those Marvel geeks collect all of that stuff, for me, that is vinyls. So I collect vinyls as part of my passion in especially in jazz music. So these are just a couple of my favorites, which I laid out. And there's some people on the call. I can't read the chats right now, I'll read them later, but I know there's some people on the call that have been trying to steal some of these. So I'm watching you, and there are others who still owe me some exchanges, so we should facilitate that soon. So that's the background. And having given you that background about myself, perhaps let's get into the story of the day. I want to share a story with you today that some of the guys on the call may know. Well, they do know, but I just found a very profound, I just found profound meaning in the story today, which I want to share with you guys. So this gentleman over here, his name is Keith Jarret, and this photo is obviously very old. He looks very different today, as you'll see shortly. So Keith Jarret is an American virtuoso pianist, and essentially what virtuoso means, when that title is bestowed on you, what they mean is that you've literally reached the ceiling in terms of your technical ability in an instrument or as a vocalist. So this is who Keith Jarret is. Just a bit more about Keith Jarret. Another name which might be familiar to you guys is Miles Davis. That's probably the most recognizable name if you're talking about jazz music. And as early as the 70s, in the early 70s, Keith Jarret was already part of Miles Davis band. And he was then in his mid to late 20s, but he was already playing in the band of, the single biggest jazz artist in history. So that's where Keith Jarret has come from. Keith Jarret has been nominated for 2 Grammy Awards, one of which he won, actually. And then Keith Jarret is famous for a style of jazz performance, which is known as improvisation. And we're lucky to have Debo, we have Loazi with us at Metro. If you ever want a workshop in improvisation, these guys can make this concept so vivid and beautiful for you. So it's, I mean, as the name would suggest, improvisation is really about living in the moment and inventing music as you play. So Keith Jarret is at the forefront of improvisation jazz musicians. Keith Jarret is very particular about what he wants when he plays. He's very particular about the venue, about the sound, about the the piano that you provide for his performance. He's extremely particular about everything. And I suppose that's not unique to him, because it's quite common for musicians across genres to give you a rider that's very specific about the sound equipment and everything that they want. So I guess where we differentiate between Keith Jarret and other musicians is that he's not just particular, he's pedantic. So Keith Jarret is pedantic to the extent of demanding absolute silence from the performance when he plays. I mean, from the audience when he performs. He doesn't want to hear a pin drop. So he'll want absolute silence, no taking of photos, no camera shutters or flashlights. That's why it's always very hard to find footage of some of his performances, because of those strict rules he has. He's even known to have played concerts in the dark, because he said, it's the music you're here to listen to, not to see me. So yeah, that's going to be an important detail to understand for the story we're telling. And then Keith Jarret has some idiosyncrasies about him, and that, I mean, that speaks to very funny things that he does when he performs, from the movements he makes to some funny sounds and vocalizations that he makes. Those of you who've watched videos of him will know what I'm talking about. But I did find a couple of GIFs on the internet of Keith Jarret in action. So this is what you can expect, or what you could expect several years ago, if you were to go and watch, if you're lucky enough to catch a Keith Jarret performance. So this is Keith Jarret in action. And yeah, this goes with sounds. We'll be like me while playing the piano. So it's weird, but I mean, it's his form of expression, and that's how he gets the best out of himself as a musician. Of course, today Keith Jarret is much older. He's a 75-year-old man, very well accomplished. And if you're lucky enough to catch a Keith Jarret performance today, he doesn't perform or tour very much. If you're lucky enough to catch that, I don't think it'll be a great idea for him to be contorting his body the way he did 30, 40 years ago when he was much younger. So this is him today. And perhaps let me just play a short clip of Keith Jarret, and this tune might be familiar to some of you, and then we'll chat a bit about that. And maybe also take notice of the kind of piano that he's playing on as you listen. I hope you've got earphones on. You'll enjoy this a lot more if you've got your earphones on. Yeah, so yeah, that's Keith Jarrett in action. And if you were listening with Christian ears, you might recognize the tune as Amazing Grace shall always be my song of praise. And it goes on to say in the chorus, I shall forever lift mine eyes to Calvary to view the cross where Jesus died for me. That's if you're listening with Christian ears. But the reality or the story behind the song actually is that a Christian songwriter adapted the melody of an Irish folk song called Oh Danny Boy to create what we know today as Amazing Grace. So I guess the beauty of it is without the lyrics, you can decide what you are hearing in the music. So, I mean, and I think there's no doubt for those of you who heard this piece of music about the virtuosity of the musician we're talking about here today. And you might have seen the piano that he's playing on. That's, I mean, that massive piano which fills the stage um, is what they call a concert grand piano. So a piano that size with that type of volume and scale is called a concert grand piano, and that'll be important um, in a short while for the story. So this is how we came to the title of today's talk, which is the Unplayable Piano, and let's get into it. So the year is 1975, and that's 45 years ago. So many of us on the call, most of us, I'm guessing, weren't born at the time. And we are in the city of Cologne, the very quaint and charming city of Cologne in Germany. And there was this young lady called Vera Brandes. She was 17 years old, and she was Germany's youngest concert promoter, actually, at the time, at the age of 17. And she had a particular knack and penchant, like some of us, for jazz music. And basically, her vision was to grow the jazz community and increase the frequency and quality of jazz performances in the city of Cologne. And so, as part of her efforts, after having run several successful concerts in smaller venues, she was now, I mean, headed for the big time. She was able to secure Keith Jarrett, who at this stage, as I said, had already toured with the Miles Davis of this world and some of his own trios and solo tours which he had done. So he was already big by then. And this 17-year-old girl from a small city in Germany manages to secure Keith Jarrett, a whole Keith Jarrett, to come and do this show. And of course, I mean, as I say, this was the biggest show I mean, this would be the biggest show thus far for herself. But not only that, she had secured the Cologne Opera House to as a venue for this show, and this was going to be the very first jazz show performed at the Cologne Opera House. And so tickets go on sale, and tickets are selling like fat gooks, as we would say here at home. And before you knew it, 1,400 tickets had been sold, and the show was sold out. And of course, what there is now is the anticipation and excitement in the air for the concert. And then, of course, the day of the show arrives, and yeah, it's supposed to be all systems go. So it happens to be a very rainy day on the 24th of January, 1975, in Cologne. And Keith Jarrett has just arrived from Switzerland, from neighboring Switzerland, where he was playing a couple of other shows. And this is his first show in Cologne, and it's supposed to be, yeah, a delightful and novel experience for him. But rain wasn't the only surprise that was waiting for Keith Jarrett in Cologne. So, as I said, there was a distinction that I tried to make earlier on. You would have seen the piano that he was playing on that video. That's what they call a concert grand piano. And this is, when I said that Keith Jarrett is particular, as I mean, some other artists are as well, he had basically specified the piano that he wanted was a Bösendorfer. That's the make. It's an Austrian make of piano. Very expensive, very high quality sound, very sought after by some of the big names in piano playing. So he had said, I want a Bösendorfer, and he had spec'd it right up to the model and the make and the model number. And it had to be a concert grand piano. Unfortunately, there was some confusion between Vera Brandes, whom I introduced you to earlier, the promoter, and the managers of the Cologne Opera House. There was some confusion, and the long story short is that they did not secure the piano that Keith Jarret had asked for. Instead, what they had was indeed a Bösendorfer piano, but this was a baby grand piano. And a baby grand piano, as you might know, is not the same as a concert grand piano. Baby grand piano is the kind of, is those grand pianos that rich people have in their houses. It's a grand piano, but it's not a grand piano, if you know what I'm talking about. So this is what was there. So this is the wrong piano. So immediately, I mean, Keith Jarret would be thinking, what's going on here? Well, the problem wasn't just that it was the wrong piano, but this piano was in a terrible condition, very poor condition. And the condition wasn't just a matter of the piano being out of tune, because if a piano is out of tune, you just bring in a professional tuner, and he knows what to do to which places to brush up on and hammer and kink up, and the piano should be fine in a couple of hours. But it was a case of a piano that had fundamental malfunctions, you know. And if you understand the anatomy of a piano, or just the basic anatomy of a piano, when your hands are laid down on the piano, the further right you move, you're going higher up in the registers, and the further left your hand moves, you're going lower down into the bass notes. That's the anatomy of a piano. So basically this piano, the further right he went, the keys were sounding very tinny and metallic, very annoying sound. And the further left he tried to move, there was no resonance. It was just not a pleasant sound. And the only place where there was some reprieve was the middle of the piano, which is where the hands of this pianist here are. And so Keith Jarret walks onto stage, he sees this piano, and of course he's shocked. He's obviously visibly disappointed. This is definitely not what had been agreed upon. So Keith Jarret starts to inspect this piano, and he even tries to play it. And after his attempt at playing it, he realizes it's a mess. Basically, it's a mess. This is not what I signed up for. And so, I mean, Keith Jarret basically then asks, look, he's with his producer, and his producer says to Vera Brandes and the opera house people, look, if you guys don't get the piano that we asked you guys to get for us, there's not going to be a show here tonight. Certainly not one by Keith Jarret. And then, what results then is a state of frantic panic from Vera, who now tries to call all the piano suppliers in the city to see where she can get this stage concert grand piano for Keith Jarret. A professional piano tuner happened to already be on stage trying to see what they could make do with this piano. And overhearing the conversation, he says, look, that's not a great idea. The last thing you want to do is to bring a massive, expensive piano on a flatbed truck in the rain. Then you're going to have a much bigger problem than the one you have right now if you've damaged the Bösendorfer concert grand piano. So it turns out this is not going to be a great idea. So that wasn't an option. And so Keith then conspires and discusses privately with his producer what the way forward is, and they come back to the young lady Vera Brandes and say, "Look, sorry, not today. This is not going to happen. We had an agreement, and you haven't met your part of the agreement, and so that's it. This is not going to happen." Keith Jarret and his producer then they leave. They walk out of the venue and head out towards the parking lot. And as you can imagine, Vera Brandes was shattered. We're talking about a teenage girl who was about to land the biggest show of her life. This was going to put her on the map. So obviously she would be terribly distressed at this huge disappointment, which was actually no doing of her own. It was just this confusion or miscommunication that took place. So Keith Jarret and his producer are headed out. They walk out into the rain, head out to the parking lot where the car is so that they can drive out. And yeah, they're about to jet off. And legend has it that Vera Brandes, with tears in her eyes, ran out of the opera house into the rain towards the car. And she flung open the door where Keith Jarret was sitting. And she basically fell on her knees in the rain and said, please, I beg you, don't go. She basically pleaded with him to stay and do this concert. And then what happened after that, Keith Jarret, his words are quoted as him having said, never forget, just for you. He is known to be a man of few words. And this was his way of saying, I'll play the concert with this whack piano, but I'm doing it just for you. This is not really a thing. This concert won't be a thing for me. And so, I mean, the tuner continues to try and make the piano as playable as possible. And he does indeed succeed in getting it at least tuned so that you're playing something that is in tune. But I mean, as I said, there's still some fundamental malfunctions, especially with as you spread your hands to the sides, the keys over there are just terrible. And Keith Jarret tries to do a practice run on the piano, tries to manipulate the keys and find his way around this messy situation, this messy piano that he's been dealt. And the other problem is that this is a baby grand. A baby grand obviously doesn't have the volume and resonance of a large concert grand piano. So this is obviously a matter of huge concern for him as well, but it's too late to back out now. One of the other things that Keith Jarret says to the guys, obviously this was going to be a recorded, the producers had arranged a team of recording engineers to come and record the show. And Keith Jarret says, look, send these recording engineers home. Like the last thing I want is for there to be any record of the mess that's going to take place here today. And Keith Jarrett's producer says, look, man, I mean, the setup is done. We may as well record. The setup is done. The engineers are here. The only thing they need to do is press record. I mean, at worst, we'll have documentation of what a bad show is or how not to do a concert, a piano concert. And so Keith obliges and the recording is approved. So it's showtime. It's later in the evening, later in the night, and the hour has come after Keith had tried to manipulate and find his way around this piano. So there's absolute silence in the Cologne Opera House, and everybody's just waiting in anticipation of, I mean, and obviously the audience knows nothing about the challenges that are taking place in the background. So Keith Jarret walks in, sits at the piano. It's around 11:30 p.m. and we're fast approaching midnight. And Keith Jarret plays the first note. And if you listen to the album, you'll find the first note that he plays is a middle G, which is consistent with the restrictions that this piano had placed on him, that he had to play from the center and out whenever he could. So he plays the first note. And in the words of Vera Brandes, the promoter, she says, the minute he played the first note, everybody knew that this was magic. She goes on to say, it's a moment I will never forget. The first tone, and everybody was totally mesmerized. And yeah, I would advise you, I mean, I would encourage you, even if you're not a jazz fan, to go and find the album on your favorite streaming platform, and you understand exactly what this means. From the very first note, it was just something so captivating. And so Keith Jarret continues to play. I mean, he delicately and elegantly glides his fingers across this piano. And I mean, Vera is shocked because, I mean, this is not the outcome she thought they would have. And he obviously has to, from a technical perspective, he's obviously having to avoid those tinny upper register keys to the right of his hand, to avoid that metallic shrilly sound that they produce. And he sticks to the middle. And of course, what this does then, it created a very unique, a very soothing and ambient quality of music that he was playing. And then he decides he needs to start building up the sound. So he starts building up the sound, and with his left hand on the bass hand side. So he starts where he was lacking the volume and the resonance. And I remember the story says that the sustain pedals, which are supposed to give a bit more of sustain and volume, were also not working. So with his left hand, he then starts these rumbling, repetitive riffs and movements with his left hand just to make up for this tiny piano's lack in resonance. But he's still not satisfied with the volume that it's pushing out. And I mean, the piano just wasn't loud enough. So Keith Jarret, in true Keith Jarret style, stands up and starts to to twist and turn. And I mean, he starts to hammer the keys. He starts to pound with the left hand to push. I mean, he's desperate to make sure that the people sitting on the balconies at the top are able to hear the sound that's coming out of this piano. And he plays and plays and plays through the night. It goes without saying that it turns out to be a rousing performance. It was, I mean, exhilarating, and I mean, it left the audiences gasping for air and sitting on the edges of their seats. It was absolutely unlike anything anyone in the audience or even Keith Jarret himself had experienced with his own playing, his own music. It was an out of body experience for him, as he would later call it. And then he starts playing his final chords of the song. He's drawing to a close, and he plays his final note. He ends up on the middle E, very close to where he started, right in the middle. And there's a reverent silence in the opera house. And then if you listen to it on the album or on the CD, you'll hear there's one guy who starts with an awkward clap, and then the whole auditorium just erupts with wild applause, and everyone is just in awe at what they've just heard, what they've just seen, what they've just experienced. And today, this is what is known as the Cologne concert. I mean, it's become a very famous concert. You can go and check it out if you want to read up more and better narrations of the story than mine. So I want to take you back to something that we spoke about earlier on. If you remember, Keith Jarret said to his producer, send these recording engineers home. There's absolutely no need for us to record something that's going to turn out into a mess. And of course, his producer said, look, man, the setup is already done, so we may as well just record. And the result of that is what we have today, what is called the Cologne concert, which is this album by Keith Jarret. And if you want to know a little bit more about this album, or I think something that's very important to know, this is an album that was played from what was supposedly an unplayable piano. Look, I know Wikipedia is not a credible source or is not the most reliable source, but please trust me on this one. This is this album from that night is basically the best-selling piano album of all time. There is no piano album across genres that has sold more copies than the Cologne concert by Keith Jarret. So yeah, as we draw to a close, we humans, in terms of the stories that we tell and the stories we tell each other, the stories that we watch, we're wired for happy endings. When we watch films, movies, series, we're all wired to get a happy ending, and particularly happy endings that have dramatic and miraculous interventions, which bring about the happy ending. And in today's story in particular, what you might have thought would have happened is that right in the nick of time, a piano, the right piano, would have been found, like a massive concert grand piano would have been found somewhere in the back of the hall, and someone says, look, no need to worry, we just found the piano that we need, and the day is saved, and we have the happy ending that we're looking for. But that's not quite what happened in this story. That's not how the story unfolded. So the novelty and this album becoming a bestseller, the unfathomable result which came out of the entire mess that this night was, all of this was designed, was specifically designed and produced by all the difficulty, the malfunction, the disorder, the mess that was in this night, that was in that piano, in that very piano, in that very moment of a piano that wasn't working. Therein was the design of the success that came out of the Cologne concert. So that magical happy ending you're looking for, I mean, that's not quite it. What we should be looking for instead, we shouldn't be looking for extraordinary and miraculous interventions to save us from the difficulties. Instead, it's within that very trial that you're experiencing that moment, that the moment of greatness will be manifest. And so there's a text in the Bible, and this is the Message Bible. It says, "Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides." Goes on to say, okay, let me read that again. I think I need to place emphasis on, "Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides." That's very strange. I mean, this guy's telling us you should rejoice and be excited to receive tests and challenges. He goes on to say, "You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors." So pressure is like a litmus test, basically, for your faith, is what he's saying. And then he goes on to say, "So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way." And I think, I mean, I looked at this text in several versions, and my favorite version personally is the Amplified, but I found that the Message Bible articulated the message of this verse, no pun intended, very well. So that's James 1, verse 2-4 in the Message Bible. So that's what the Message Bible says. So my message, though, today, how I would reinterpret what James says, I would say, consider it a sheer gift, friends, when you're confronted with an unplayable piano. And I think 2020 is a year that has thrown an unplayable piano in front of every one of us in so many ways. I have my own unplayable pianos that I've been dealt, which I'm still trying to figure out whether to run away from or to confront. But if there's anything we've learned from today's story is that if we reinterpret James's text in line with our message today, is that you should know that these worn out keys and these broken pedals are an opportunity for you to find harmonies and rhythms that you never imagined. So basically, that broken piano, that unplayable piano, has actually been designed for you to experience God's providence and God bringing you out, basically, of whatever it is that you think is going to be insurmountable, for God to bring you out of that. So don't be quick to walk away from the piano. Play with a focus and determination that might produce the performance of your life. And what happens when you've persevered and you go up to that piano, as unplayable as it is that you end up rendering a gift to other people. You end up rendering a testimony, not just for yourself, but for someone else as well. And that's what I wanted to share with you tonight, guys. That's my story for this evening.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you so much, Sbu, for that word. So I'll actually have us take a moment, all of us, just 1 minute, to actually reflect on what's your takeaway from this conversation, or from the story that Sbu has given us, and then we'll kind of bring it back in reflecting insights and perspectives for the next 10 minutes. So just a minute to think about, if you're almost like your one-liner takeaway from today, what would that be?
Do Do they have to share that in the chats?
So I'm giving everyone a minute, and then anyone who feels to share, maybe we'll take like 3 or 4 people to share out loud, and then anyone else can actually feel free to drop it in the chat. And also, if you do have any questions as well, feel free to share them as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
Cool. Maybe give it another 15 seconds to just silently reflect on that word.
Great.
All right, cool. I don't know if anyone would like to, I guess, share. I mean, feel free. You can either share it on the chat or actually just, I know there's a like hand up kind of symbol here in the chat section. Is it under the chats? Under participants. So if you want to raise your hand, I can see you, or just actually step in. So anyone like to share, I guess, what their takeaway has been from this? I guess I could actually just start off by, I guess, and thank you, Sbu, for that word. And yeah, just that story, actually brilliant storytelling, I must say. Actually, just every moment I was gripped. I was like, oh, this is a really good story. But yeah, definitely. And I think something I've been thinking about a lot around how, how sometimes we get so caught up in what we didn't get, and missing out on what God is giving us as the alternative to it, and the blessing of the alternative. And just in my own spiritual journey, getting so caught up in what could have been instead of making the best of what is, and the need of that, and I call it a spiritual discipline of being more present in the daily bread that God gives us, and making the best of it. So I think that definitely was a big takeaway from me. Anyone else? I mean, just thinking about, I guess, and I maybe in the spirit of, the Metro community, in personal reflection and as it applies to your spiritual journey.
Numbasa put up a hand, Kat.
Oh, yes, Numbasa. Sorry, I actually can't see. Thank you. Yeah. Hey, Numbasa. Thank you, Aaron.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, Numbasa.
Oh, I was gonna say that what I've learned, thank you, Sbu, what I've learned is that the light and the darkness actually coexist, in our lives. And often we're trying to have the sunshine, but the seasons are there for a reason, and seemingly even with the COVID and everything else, we just need to keep going, just like nature keeps going. It experiences the good, the bad. In fact, I think the creatures and nature doesn't even see summer or winter as good or bad, but that everything is just part of God's plan. So just starting to embrace every season and seeing God and his providence in each and every season.
Wow.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and maybe I guess a question with that is like, how do we, how do we make the best of that unplayable piano? Because I think in the narrative of the story, but I guess now saying like in my Christian journey, here I am, I don't have a job, here I am, I'm stressed about, not being able to do X, Y, and Z. How do I do that practically?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm not a theologian. I basically share from my own experience and anecdotes in talking with other friends, and them sharing their walk as well. And maybe the anecdote that I should share, I mean, I was talking to a friend not too long ago who was telling me about a year that she experienced where where she was working towards a defining career milestone, very key milestone in her career. And in that year, she experienced, I mean, untold difficulty, untold calamity, where she lost someone very close to her who died from a terminal illness. She was going through a lot of personal challenges as well. And I think how she phrased it at the end, when she needed now to start working towards her professional accreditation and making sure that she gets this in the bag, she was basically a mess. I mean, it was tough, and this was her unplayable piano. I can't go into these exams. I cannot go and take on this challenge when I have this unplayable piano of having lost someone so close to me, when everything in my personal life seems to be falling apart like this. And her words to me, when she says that she decided to go and focus on preparing for this professional milestone and making sure that she prioritizes this, how she phrased it verbatim. She said, I basically had to decide whether I'm going to fail at this and have a valid excuse, which is that I was bereaved. I had lost someone very close to me. I had gone through personal challenges. It was either going to be that, or it was going to be, I went up and played that piano. I went and wrote to those exams. I went and accomplished that milestone in spite of the challenges, in spite of everything that I went through. I just had to decide which one of those stories it was that I'm going to choose. And she chose the latter.
Wow. Great.
Yeah, Errol, you want to jump in?
I think Lachey, and then I'll share something. I think Lachey was just wanting to.
Cool. So yeah, Lachey, from your side.
Thanks so much. Sbu, what an awesome story. And yeah, an awesome delivery as well. So my question is more on the symbolism of Keith Jarret and his music ability. Do we consider the fact that he is a virtuoso? He's reached the pinnacle of his ability to play the piano. Does that impact his ability to play an unplayable piano? Because had anybody else, would they have had the same brevity, the same inclination to manage the keys and manage the dissonance, the tinnitus, and the So how do we compute that into the story?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think it's brilliant that you should bring that into the mix, because this speaks to in your own spiritual walk. If you don't build the trust, the experience, if you don't walk with Christ and actually put him to the test at his promises, like hold him to his promises, if you don't have that muscle memory in cycling and in running. I'm a cyclist, and some of my cycling friends are on the call. Stumo is here, Stu is here. I'm not sure if any of the other cyclists are here. But if you don't, if you've got a race coming up, and you don't train, basically, for example, races like we've done the Cape Argus with the guys, and it's brutal. It's punishing on your thighs when you go up. What's that hill in Cape Town? Chapman's Peak. When you go up there, if you haven't been training for Chapman's Peak in the preceding months, if you only started 3 weeks before, you're not going to be ready for the crisis which happens on that hill. On that hill, you see people climbing off their bikes and actually walking, dragging their bikes behind them, because the muscle memory isn't there. You haven't built that resistance. You haven't built that experience which is required for you to go up the hill. There's another hill here. I see Stu Papablose is talking about Sekerbosi in the East Rand. Brutal. And if you haven't been doing your training to prepare yourself for that, you're not going to be able to climb up that hill. Another example, I don't know if you've been watching the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance. It's obviously been taking the world by storm. So in basketball, they talk about what they call the clutch, and the clutch is when it's do or die, and that's how they sometimes measure whenever there's a debate about who's the greatest of all time. Is it LeBron? Is it LeBron? Is it Michael Jordan? Is it Kobe Bryant? then one of the key metrics that they go into is to measure how you perform in the clutch. That's when there's only 2 seconds left on the clock and you are being looked upon to deliver under pressure. So, and it's only experience that can get you to be a Michael Jordan who, even when there's 2 seconds on the clock, every team member knows if they throw the ball at him and he has to do a free throw, that ball is going into the rim because he's built up that experience. So Keith Jarret, his virtuosity, all the years of practice, his intimate relationship with the piano, that definitely played a role in him finding ways to manipulate that keyboard and produce the best-selling piano album of all time.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a deep one. Thank you so much, Sbu. Errol?
Yeah, I think it's already been said. You know, I mean, I was coming from that perspective, just not just from a spiritual perspective, but that whether you're at your work or in your business as an entrepreneur, you know, you've got to pursue your craft with painstaking excellence.
Yeah.
You know, as Martin Luther King said, you know, whatever you do, you must do it so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn could not do it better than yourself.
Yay.
And
Yes, sir.
And he is a reflection of the type of character that was willing to go to extreme lengths to master his craft so that the living, the dead, or the unborn could not do it better than himself.
Yep.
But also it speaks to a book, Kat, that you had given to me some time ago or had sort of highlighted, which was a book called Call to Create. God has given to each and every one of us a measure of creativity. Whether we use it or not is another matter, but he has given to us all the ability to create. And so what I see that's just amazing in that space is that his creativity, because it had been painstakingly worked through, could figure out a way to create and deliver in extreme circumstances. Now, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as someone who's never worked for anyone since I came to South Africa, you're handed this unplayable piano, but it is in no way a means to say that you can't learn to creatively find ways to play it. I think it has to do with a mindset. I think it has to do with a growth mindset. I think it has to do with possibility thinking. I think it has to do with not allowing yourself to be institutionalized by the frame of references that have defined what is possible versus what is not possible. And I do believe a large measure of that is not just linked to God, but you find people who don't know God utilizing the God-given capabilities of creativity to do extraordinary things. So I just found that just a really powerful illustration. Just looking at my own life or my family's life, everybody sitting in my house are creatives, you know, and I've seen how they've struggled through creating something from nothing or dealing with the piano that was unplayable. And so thank you so much, Sbu. It was really inspiring to me.
Yeah, no,
Thank you,
Errol. And I guess Stumo just put something on. Actually, Stumo, would you mind just like sharing your thoughts here? I know you've already written it, but I think it would be great to